Life does not reward intention. It rewards accuracy. One of the central ideas of this book is that most people do not fail because they are lazy or unintelligent, but because they live inside distorted versions of reality. They avoid uncomfortable truths, ignore feedback, and protect their ego instead of correcting their course. The book begins by confronting this illusion head-on. Reality is the ultimate boss, and it does not negotiate. You can either see things as they are and adapt, or you can deny them and pay the price later. Progress only begins the moment you stop arguing with how the world works and start learning how to operate within it. The author explains that pain is not an enemy, but a signal. Every mistake, disappointment, or failure carries information, and people who succeed are the ones who extract lessons instead of excuses. When pain is combined with honest reflection, it produces growth. When pain is combined with ego, it produces repeated failure. This is why some people stay stuck in the same financial, emotional, and professional situations for decades. They feel the pain, but never decode the message. High performers treat pain like data, something to be analyzed rather than avoided. At the core of the book is a simple but powerful system for achieving almost anything in life. First, you must clearly define what you want. Vague desires create vague results. Second, you must identify the problems that stand in the way of those goals. Problems are not setbacks. They are signals that something needs to be improved. Third, you must diagnose the root cause of those problems, not just their surface symptoms. Most people try to fix outcomes instead of fixing the process. Fourth, you design solutions that directly address the root causes. Finally, you execute those solutions with discipline and consistency. This 5-step loop repeats endlessly, and mastery comes from refining it over time. A major theme throughout the book is radical honesty, both with yourself and with others. Real growth cannot exist where people are afraid to speak the truth. The book argues that environments built on politeness, hierarchy, or fear often hide problems until they become catastrophic. In contrast, cultures that encourage open disagreement, evidence-based debate, and transparency uncover mistakes early when they are still small and fixable. Truth may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but dishonesty quietly compounds into long-term damage. The book also emphasizes that people are wired very differently, and these differences are not flaws, but design features. Some people are creative but disorganized. Others are analytical but rigid. Some thrive under pressure, while others collapse. The mistake most organizations and individuals make is expecting everyone to think and act the same way. Success comes from understanding these differences and placing people, including yourself, into roles and systems where their natural strengths are maximized and their weaknesses are protected against. Ego is identified as one of the greatest obstacles to learning and success. Ego makes people defend bad decisions, reject feedback, and confuse confidence with correctness. The most effective decision makers are not those who always believe they are right, but those who are willing to change their mind quickly when new evidence appears. Humility, in this framework, is not weakness. It is a strategic advantage. The faster you can admit you are wrong, the faster you can adjust, and the faster you can move forward. When the book shifts to work and organizations, it highlights that the best systems are those where the best idea wins, not the loudest voice or highest title. Authority should never overpower logic. Decisions should be stress-tested, debated openly, and supported by evidence. This approach reduces blind spots and prevents costly mistakes. Strong organizations are not those without problems, but those that surface problems early and solve them systematically. Hiring and team building receive significant attention. Skills can be learned, but values are difficult to change. The book stresses the importance of selecting people who value truth, take responsibility, and think independently. A single person who avoids accountability or resists feedback can poison an entire culture. Long-term success depends not on talent alone, but on alignment between values, behavior, and responsibility. Another powerful principle is the idea of building systems instead of relying on memory or motivation. The human brain is emotional and inconsistent, especially under stress. Elite performers reduce decision fatigue by writing things down, creating rules, and automating repetitive choices. When decisions are systemized, execution becomes reliable. Over time, these systems compound into extraordinary results, while motivation inevitably fades. The book also argues that the best decision makers think in probabilities rather than certainties. They study patterns, track outcomes, and learn from history. Instead of reacting emotionally to short-term results, they evaluate whether a decision was good based on the quality of the process, not the immediate outcome. This mindset creates resilience and prevents panic during uncertainty. Ultimately, the book reframes success as the result of clear thinking, structured decision-making, and relentless learning. Meaningful work does not come from comfort or ease, but from engaging deeply with difficult problems that matter. Struggle, when aligned with purpose, creates fulfillment. Avoiding discomfort leads to stagnation, while embracing challenge leads to growth. The final message is simple but demanding. If you do not consciously choose your principles, you will unconsciously live by weak ones. If you do not build systems to guide your decisions, emotions will control them for you. And if you refuse to face reality, reality will eventually force the lesson in a far harsher way. This book is not about motivation or inspiration. It is about building an internal operating system that works under pressure, over time, and in the real world. As the book moves deeper, it becomes clear that principles are not motivational quotes or abstract beliefs, but personal laws you live by when pressure is highest. Anyone can say they value discipline, honesty, or hard work when things are easy. Principles only reveal themselves when decisions are costly, uncomfortable, or unpopular. In those moments, people do not rise to their aspirations. They fall to their systems. That is why the author insists that principles must be written, tested, and refined through experience, not simply assumed. One of the most powerful ideas presented is the separation between decision quality and outcome quality. Good decisions can sometimes produce bad outcomes, and bad decisions can occasionally produce good ones. Most people confuse the two and learn the wrong lessons as a result. The disciplined thinker judges decisions based on logic, probabilities, and available information at the time the choice was made. This approach prevents emotional overreaction, regret-based thinking, and reckless behavior after short-term losses or wins. The book also emphasizes the importance of understanding cause and effect relationships in everything you do. Nothing meaningful happens randomly. Financial success, career growth, and personal stability are the result of patterns repeated over time. When people fail, they often blame external circumstances instead of tracing outcomes back to their own behaviors, habits, and decisions. Mastery comes from identifying these chains of cause and effect and deliberately redesigning them in your favor. Another recurring theme is the idea of operating above yourself. This means observing your own thoughts, emotions, and reactions as if you were analyzing another person. By doing this, you reduce emotional attachment to being right and increase your ability to course correct. People who can step outside themselves learn faster, adapt quicker, and suffer less from repeated mistakes. This meta-awareness becomes a powerful edge in both life and work. In professional environments, the book stresses that mistakes should not be punished but examined. Fear of blame destroys transparency, while curiosity fuels improvement. The goal is not to avoid mistakes entirely, which is impossible, but to ensure that mistakes are small, fast, and instructive. When organizations normalize learning from failure instead of hiding it, progress accelerates dramatically. The author also discusses the dangers of overconfidence and blind optimism. While confidence is necessary to act, unchecked confidence leads to ignoring risks and dismissing opposing views. Intelligent optimism, on the other hand, acknowledges uncertainty while still moving forward. It balances ambition with caution and vision with realism. This mindset protects people from catastrophic losses while still allowing them to pursue large goals. Another critical insight involves leverage. Time, knowledge, systems, and people are all forms of leverage that multiply results. The most successful individuals do not work harder in isolation. They build structures that allow their efforts to scale. This is why creating repeatable processes and delegating effectively is emphasized so heavily. Leverage turns limited effort into exponential impact. The book repeatedly returns to the idea that clarity beats speed. Rushed decisions often feel productive, but usually create hidden problems that surface later. Slower, more thoughtful decision-making at the front end saves enormous time and energy in the long run. This is especially true in complex environments where small errors can compound into major failures. As the narrative approaches its later sections, the focus shifts toward legacy and long-term thinking. Short-term wins mean little if they undermine long-term stability. Principles are meant to endure across changing circumstances, technologies, and environments. They act as anchors during chaos and as guides during opportunity. People who think in decades rather than days make fundamentally different choices. The book ultimately frames life and work as a continuous learning machine. You try, you fail, you reflect, you adapt, and you try again. This loop never ends. The only real failure is refusing to learn. Those who embrace this cycle remain relevant, resilient, and effective, regardless of external change. In the closing message, the book leaves the listener with a responsibility rather than a promise. You are responsible for identifying your weaknesses, designing your principles, and building systems that protect you from yourself. No external validation, motivation, or rescue is coming. The reward for doing this work is not perfection, but progress, and over time, progress compounds into freedom, stability, and control over your direction in life. As the thinking in the book matures, it becomes clear that principles are not static rules, but evolving frameworks. They are tested by reality, refined through failure, and strengthened by repetition. When a principle fails, it is not rejected emotionally, but examined logically. The question is never, "Why did this happen to me?" but What does this outcome reveal about how the system works? This mindset transforms frustration into insight and chaos into clarity. The book emphasizes that most people dramatically underestimate how much control they actually have over their lives. They overestimate luck and underestimate design. By deliberately engineering routines, environments, and decision-making processes, you reduce the role of chance. Success begins to look predictable rather than mysterious. Over time, what once felt like discipline becomes automatic, and what once felt difficult becomes normal. A powerful section explores the relationship between fear and decision-making. Fear is not portrayed as something to eliminate, but something to understand. Fear often points to risk, but it can also signal ego protection or comfort addiction. The skilled decision-maker learns to distinguish between rational fear and emotional resistance. When fear is rational, it informs caution. When it is emotional, it must be overridden in service of long-term goals. Another key idea is the concept of believability-weighted decision-making. Not all opinions carry equal value. Experience, track record, and proven judgment matter. Listening equally to everyone may feel fair, but it often leads to poor decisions. The book argues for weighing input based on demonstrated competence rather than confidence. This approach dramatically improves decision quality in complex environments. The book also highlights the danger of living reactively. Constant reaction creates the illusion of busyness while preventing real progress. Principles create space between stimulus and response. Instead of reacting emotionally to events, you consult your principles, evaluate options, and respond intentionally. This shift alone changes how stress, conflict, and uncertainty are experienced. As the discussion deepens, the author stresses that personal weaknesses should not be hidden or denied, but openly acknowledged and engineered around. Trying to fix every weakness is inefficient. Instead, successful people build systems that either compensate for or bypass their limitations. Self-knowledge becomes a strategic advantage rather than a source of shame. There is also a strong focus on long-term resilience. Markets change, industries evolve, and circumstances shift. But principles that emphasize learning, adaptability, and truth remain relevant. Those who anchor themselves to rigid tactics eventually break. Those who anchor themselves to principles adjust and survive. Flexibility at the tactical level, combined with firmness at the principle level, creates durability. The book further explains that progress is often nonlinear. Long periods of effort may show little visible result, followed by sudden breakthroughs. This is where most people quit. Those who understand compounding stay consistent even when feedback is delayed. They trust the system they have built rather than their short-term emotions. As it approaches its conclusion, the book reframes success as a responsibility. With greater clarity and capability comes the obligation to make better decisions, to create healthier environments, and to contribute meaningfully. Principles are not just tools for personal gain, but mechanisms for creating order and value in the world around you. The final tone is calm, grounded, and demanding. You are reminded that life will always contain uncertainty, difficulty, and risk. Principles do not remove these challenges. They give you a way to navigate them without panic or paralysis. They allow you to move forward with confidence grounded in logic rather than hope. The book ultimately leaves you with a choice. You can drift, reacting emotionally to circumstances, repeating patterns you never examined, or you can design your principles build your systems, and take responsibility for the direction of your life and work. The difference between these two paths is not talent or intelligence. It is intention, clarity, and discipline applied consistently over time. At some point, comfort becomes more dangerous than failure. The book quietly exposes a truth most people spend their lives running from. Nothing destroys potential faster than a life that feels good enough. When pain disappears, growth usually disappears with it. People don't fall apart because life is too hard. They fall apart because they stop demanding more from themselves. Principles exist to protect you from that slow decay, the kind that doesn't hurt today but ruins everything tomorrow. The author makes it clear that avoidance is the real enemy. Avoiding hard conversations, avoiding honest self-assessment, avoiding responsibility. Every time you avoid reality, you hand over control. And control, once surrendered, is rarely given back gently. Life collects its debts with interest. What you refuse to face today will return later, heavier, louder, and far more expensive. There is a brutal honesty in the idea that no one is coming to rescue you from your own patterns. Not your friends, not your environment, not time. If your decisions are weak, time will not fix them. It will expose them. Years don't heal poor judgment. They magnify it. Principles are not about becoming perfect. They are about stopping the bleeding before it becomes irreversible. The book pushes the listener to confront their own excuses, because excuses feel safe but slowly poison ambition. They explain why you stayed small, why you didn't try again, why you accepted less than you were capable of building. But every excuse comes with a hidden cost, the quiet understanding that you could have chosen differently. That knowledge doesn't disappear, it waits. Fear runs through every chapter like a shadow. Fear of being wrong, fear of looking stupid, fear of losing what little stability you've built. The book doesn't try to eliminate fear, it exposes it. Fear is not the signal to stop. It is the signal that something important is at stake. The question is never whether you feel fear. The question is whether fear makes your decisions for you. There is a dark clarity in realizing that most suffering is self-inflicted through unconscious repetition. The same reactions, the same habits, the same emotional decisions dressed up as logic. Until you interrupt the pattern, nothing changes. Principles are that interruption. They are the moment you stop reacting and start choosing, even when it hurts. The book also forces a confrontation with ego, and this confrontation is not gentle. Ego wants to be right more than it wants to be free. Ego wants comfort more than progress. Ego whispers that you already know enough. But every time ego wins, growth dies quietly in the background. Humility, in contrast, feels humiliating at first, but it is the doorway to power. Only the person willing to admit ignorance can actually escape it. There is a heavy emphasis on discipline when motivation disappears. Motivation is emotional. Discipline is structural. When life becomes overwhelming, when results lag behind effort, when nothing feels rewarding, principles are what keep you moving. They don't care how you feel. They don't negotiate. They execute. And in dark seasons, execution is survival. The book strips away the fantasy that success feels good while it's happening. Most progress feels lonely. Most growth feels uncertain. Most transformation feels uncomfortable. If you wait to feel ready, confident, or inspired, you will wait forever. Principles move you forward when emotions beg you to stop. As the message deepens, it becomes impossible to ignore the truth that stagnation is a choice. So is growth. So is discipline. So is honesty. Every day you either reinforce the person you are becoming or weaken them. There is no neutral ground. The system is always running, whether you are conscious of it or not. In its darkest but most empowering message, the book reminds you that your life is the accumulated weight of your decisions, not your intentions, not your plans, not your words, your decisions. And when you finally accept that responsibility without resentment or denial, something changes. You stop asking for permission. You stop waiting for clarity. You stop needing reassurance. The final emotional undercurrent is not hope. It is resolve. A quiet, grounded resolve that understands life will remain difficult, unpredictable, and unfair. Principles do not remove the struggle. They make you stronger than it. They turn chaos into structure and fear into movement. And when everything else fails, when motivation is gone, when confidence is shattered, when the future feels heavy, principles remain cold, clear, unemotional, waiting for you to act. Because in the end, discipline outlives motivation. Truth outlives comfort, and systems outlive excuses. Eventually, you realize that the most dangerous lies are the quiet ones you tell yourself. The lie that you still have time. The lie that you'll change when things calm down. The lie that your potential is somehow guaranteed just because you can feel it inside you. Potential means nothing without execution. Untapped potential is not a gift, it is a debt. And one day, life will demand payment. The book forces an uncomfortable realization: most people are not trapped by circumstances, they are trapped by unexamined habits. They repeat the same behaviors, make the same emotional decisions, and then act surprised when nothing changes. Years pass. Energy fades. Options narrow. Principles exist to break that loop before it hardens into identity. There is a moment described, not directly but unmistakably, when you understand that comfort has cost you more than struggle ever could. Comfort delays pain, but it multiplies it. Discipline hurts now, but it saves you later. This is the trade no one wants to accept early, and everyone regrets ignoring later. Principles are how you choose pain on your terms instead of having it forced on you. The book strips away the fantasy of motivation as a reliable force. Motivation disappears the moment life becomes heavy. It vanishes under stress, fatigue, rejection, and doubt. Principles remain when motivation dies. They are not emotional. They are mechanical. They move you forward even when you don't believe in yourself anymore. There is something deeply unsettling in the idea that your future self is watching your current decisions, watching you hesitate, watching you compromise, watching you choose relief over responsibility. Every shortcut you take today becomes a wall tomorrow. Every hard decision you avoid now becomes a crisis later. Principles are the only way to act in the present with respect for the future. The book makes it painfully clear that clarity often comes after commitment, not before it. Waiting to feel ready is just fear wearing logic as a disguise. You don't gain confidence and then act. You act, and confidence follows if the system is correct. Principles remove the need for certainty. They replace it with direction. There is also a quiet warning embedded in the narrative. Chaos favors the prepared. When pressure hits, when uncertainty rises, when systems collapse, the people who survive are not the most hopeful. They are the most structured. Those without principles panic. Those with principles execute. Calm is not a personality trait. It is the byproduct of preparation. As the weight of the message settles in, the listener is left with an unavoidable truth. No one is holding you back more effectively than you are. Not society, not luck, not timing. Your tolerance for discomfort defines the size of your life. Principles raise that tolerance. Without them, you shrink. The book does not promise happiness. It promises something far more valuable: stability under pressure, the ability to move when everything feels heavy, the capacity to think when emotions are screaming. That is real power, quiet power, the kind that doesn't need validation. In the end, the darkness is not meant to scare you. It is meant to wake you up, to strip away illusions, to leave you alone with the truth that your life is being shaped right now by decisions so small you barely notice them. And once you see that clearly, you cannot unsee it. Because once you understand this, excuses sound hollow, waiting feels dangerous, and drifting feels unforgivable. What remains is a choice, not tomorrow, not someday, now. Principles are not inspiration. They are survival rules, and the moment you live by them, everything begins to change. There comes a moment when denial stops working, when distraction no longer numbs the feeling, when you realize you are tired, not from effort, but from avoidance, tired of promising yourself you'll change, tired of explaining why now isn't the right time, tired of carrying the quiet weight of knowing you could have done more. The book speaks directly to that moment, the moment where pretending becomes heavier than action. It makes one thing painfully clear. Life does not punish you for failing. It punishes you for staying the same. Failure can teach. Stagnation only erodes. Day by day, it dulls ambition, weakens discipline, and convinces you that this is just how things are. Principles exist to stop that erosion. They draw a hard line between who you were and who you refuse to remain. The darkness deepens when you understand that no dramatic collapse is required for a life to be wasted. Most lives don't fall apart. They fade out, slowly, quietly, with distractions, routines, and acceptable excuses. The book does not shout this truth. It whispers it because whispers are harder to ignore when you're alone. There is an unforgiving clarity in recognizing that every day you don't act, you are actively training yourself to tolerate less. Less discipline, less courage, less honesty. The brain adapts downward just as easily as it adapts upward. Principles reverse that decay. They force your standard back up when everything in you wants to lower it. The book repeatedly returns to responsibility, not as a burden, but as liberation. The moment you stop blaming conditions, timing, or other people, something sharpens inside you. You stop negotiating with reality. You stop waiting for permission. You stop needing someone to believe in you. Responsibility removes the illusion of helplessness and replaces it with obligation. There is a cold truth here. Nobody remembers what you plan to do. Nobody benefits from what you almost became. The world only responds to what you build, what you execute, and what you endure without quitting. Principles turn intention into inevitability. They remove choice from moments where weakness usually wins. As the book reaches its heaviest psychological ground, it challenges you to imagine the version of yourself that never changed. The one who stayed comfortable, the one who avoided the hard conversations, the one who kept postponing discipline. That version does not disappear. It waits at the end of the road you are currently on. And one day, you will meet them, either with respect or with regret. This is why the book insists that principles must operate when you are tired, distracted, emotional, and afraid. Anyone can make good decisions on good days. Principles exist for the bad ones, the lonely ones, the days when quitting feels logical, the nights when doubt sounds reasonable. There is no fantasy here about transformation being exciting. Most of it feels mechanical, repetitive, unseen. You follow rules when no one is watching. You execute when no reward is immediate. You hold standards when lowering them would feel easier. This is not glamour. This is construction. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something changes. You trust yourself again, not because you feel confident, but because you keep your word to yourself. That trust becomes dangerous in the best way. It makes you harder to break, harder to manipulate, harder to stop. The final weight of the message is this: life will never become less demanding. You must become more structured, more honest, more deliberate. Principles do not make life easier. They make you stronger than what life throws at you. There is no applause for this path, no shortcuts, no rescue, only clarity, only discipline, only forward motion. And if that feels heavy, it should, because light lives on the other side of weight. Eventually the noise fades, the comparisons, the opinions, the constant pull to look normal, safe, acceptable. What's left is silence, and in that silence, the truth becomes unavoidable. You are exactly where your decisions have placed you, not where you hope to be, not where you plan to be, where you earned to be. This realization can crush you, or it can harden you. The book makes it clear. This is the moment where adults are separated from spectators. There is something terrifying about understanding that no dramatic change is required to destroy a life. Only small compromises, repeated daily. Sleeping in when discipline was needed. Staying quiet when truth was required. Choosing relief when resistance would have built strength. These moments don't feel dangerous while they're happening. That's why they work. Principles exist to expose these moments before they quietly add up to regret. The book presses on the idea that discipline is not intensity, it is consistency when intensity is gone. It is showing up when nothing feels urgent, when no one is watching, when the reward is distant and abstract. This is where most people disappear. Not because they can't do the work, but because they can't tolerate the silence that comes with doing it alone. There is a harsh clarity in realizing that your emotions are not commands. They are weather, they change, they pass. But if you let them steer, you will drift endlessly. Principles take the wheel when emotions panic. They don't argue, they don't persuade, they execute. And over time, execution creates evidence. Evidence creates belief. Belief creates momentum. The book dismantles the myth that confidence comes first. Confidence is the result of kept promises to yourself. Every time you follow your principles despite discomfort, you rebuild self-respect. Every time you break them, you fracture it. This is why some people feel exhausted without doing much. They are constantly negotiating with themselves. Principles end the negotiation. There is a moment of quiet violence in accepting that nobody owes you understanding. Nobody owes you patience. Nobody owes you results. The world responds only to what you repeatedly do. Once this sinks in, self-pity loses its appeal. It becomes too expensive, too weak, too slow for what you're trying to build. The book does not glamorize resilience. It presents it as necessity. Because life will test you when you are least prepared, least motivated, and least certain. When that moment arrives, you will not rise to your intentions. You will fall to your systems. If your systems are weak, you will break quietly. If they are strong, you will move forward without drama. There is no promise of balance here, only alignment. Alignment between what you say matters and how you act when it costs you something. That alignment creates a kind of inner silence, a calm that doesn't depend on outcomes, a stability that doesn't need reassurance. By now, the message is unmistakable. This is not about becoming extraordinary. It is about refusing to be unconscious, refusing to let days pass without direction, refusing to let comfort slowly erase your edge. Principles are how you stay awake while the world tries to lull you to sleep. And when you finally live this way, really live it, you stop asking whether it's worth it, because you feel the difference immediately in how you stand, in how you decide, in how little tolerance you have for excuses, especially your own. No drama, no speeches, just quiet execution. That is the power the book offers, not motivation, not hope, control. At some point, you stop asking why life feels hard and start asking why you avoided becoming strong. The book quietly dismantles the idea that struggle is unfair. Struggle is neutral. It is the price of becoming someone capable of carrying more. What breaks people is not pressure. It is the lack of structure beneath it. Pressure without principles crushes. Pressure with principles forges. There is a dark calm that comes when you finally accept that ease was never the goal. Ease makes you fragile. Ease makes you dependent. Ease makes you negotiable. Principles remove negotiation. They decide in advance what you will do when your emotions beg you to quit. They take the burden of choice away from your weakest moments. The book exposes how dangerous hope can be when it is not backed by action. Hope without structure turns into delay. Delay turns into regret. Regret turns into bitterness. Principles interrupt that chain. They do not promise a better future. They demand a harder present. You begin to see that every time you let yourself slide, you teach yourself that your word is optional. And when your word becomes optional, discipline collapses. Self-respect collapses. Direction collapses. The book does not frame this as failure. It frames it as training. You are always training yourself to become someone. The question is whether you like who that training is producing. There is a moment of silence in the message where everything becomes uncomfortably clear. No one is tracking your excuses. No one is counting how tired you are. No one is grading your intentions. The world only responds to what you do repeatedly. Principles are how you make sure repetition works in your favor instead of against you. The darkness here is honest. It does not motivate with fantasy. It motivates with inevitability. If you do nothing, something still happens, just not what you want. Time will pass either way. Energy will decline either way. The only variable left is whether you built something before it was too late. The book forces you to confront a question that has no emotional answer. What kind of life is built by the decisions you're making right now? Not someday, not after things improve, right now. Because direction is decided long before arrival. There is no dramatic transformation scene, no sudden breakthrough, just a slow tightening of standards, a refusal to lie to yourself anymore, a willingness to be uncomfortable longer than most people can tolerate. This is where separation happens, quietly, invisibly, permanently. Eventually, you realize that discipline is not punishment. It is self-respect in action. It is how you tell the future that you take it seriously. Principles are the language of that respect. They speak when motivation goes silent. The book leaves you alone with this truth on purpose, because no speech can carry it for you, no voice can act for you, no summary can save you, only execution remains. Cold, repetitive, unemotional, and that is why it works. Because when excuses run out, when darkness feels familiar, principles don't care how you feel. They move you forward anyway. And forward is the only direction that changes anything. At the deepest level, the book is not talking about success. It is talking about survival of the self, about what happens when you live too long without structure, when days blur together and ambition quietly starves, when you wake up one morning and realize you've been busy for years but building nothing that can carry you forward. This is where principles stop being optional and start becoming necessary. There is a silent war happening inside you every single day. One side wants ease, distraction, relief. The other wants growth, discipline, truth. Most people don't lose because they are weak. They lose because they never chose a side. Principles are that choice, made once, then enforced daily. Without them, the easier voice always wins, and the easier voice never builds anything that lasts. The book forces you to confront the cost of emotional living. When feelings dictate decisions, progress becomes fragile. When moods control action, consistency collapses. Emotional decision-making feels human, but it produces unstable lives. Principles are inhuman by design. They don't care about excuses. They don't respond to moods. They exist to override weakness when weakness shows up pretending to be logic. There is a harsh realization that discipline is not something you rise into. It is something you fall into when you remove all other options. When you stop allowing yourself to negotiate. When you stop asking, "Do I feel like it?" and start asking, "What does the system require?" Freedom begins where negotiation with yourself ends. The darkness intensifies when you understand that every ignored standard lowers the next one. Every broken promise to yourself makes the next promise cheaper. This is how self-respect erodes, not through failure, but through inconsistency. Principles rebuild self-respect slowly, painfully, and honestly. Not by talking, by doing. The book does not glorify struggle, but it does not soften it either. It tells you plainly, if you avoid pain now, you will meet it later, multiplied. If you choose discipline now, you will earn options later. This is not motivation. This is math. Cause and effect applied over time, without emotion. There is an almost ruthless focus on repetition. The same actions, the same standards, the same execution, day after day, especially when nothing seems to be working. This is where most people quit, not because the work is too hard, but because the silence is too loud. No praise, no feedback, no visible progress. Principles keep you moving through that silence. As the message tightens, it strips away the illusion that you need to feel inspired to act. Inspiration is rare. Discipline is available every day. The people who change their lives are not inspired more often. They obey their systems more consistently. They move even when confidence is gone, especially when confidence is gone. There is a moment of brutal clarity when you realize that chaos is patient. It waits for you to relax. It waits for you to skip days. It waits for you to tell yourself you've earned a break. Principles exist to deny chaos that opening. They are the lock on the door when you're tired and tempted to leave it open. The book leaves you face to face with the person you are becoming through repetition, not the version you imagine, the version your habits are creating. That person is forming whether you pay attention or not. Principles allow you to intervene before it's too late. And finally, there is no triumphant ending, no dramatic finish, just a quiet understanding. Your life will not be saved by motivation, intelligence, or luck. It will be shaped by the rules you follow when no one is watching, no one is coming, no moment will arrive, no switch will flip. There is only today, and the system you choose to obey. Principles are not comfort. They are armor, and once you put them on, you don't feel invincible. You feel prepared. The author is very clear about one thing. Repetition is not optional. It is how reality programs you. Nothing meaningful changes in your life because of a single decision, a single insight, or a single burst of motivation. Everything that becomes permanent, good or bad, does so through repeated behavior over time. Reality does not respond to what you understand once. It responds to what you do consistently. He explains that the brain, your habits, your emotions, and even your results are shaped by loops. You think, you act, you get a result, and that result reinforces the next thought. When this loop repeats long enough, it becomes automatic. This is why people feel stuck. They are not trapped by circumstance. They are trapped by repeated patterns they stopped questioning. The author emphasizes that repetition beats intensity. One strong effort means nothing if it is not followed by another and another and another. Small, correct actions repeated thousands of times will always outperform big emotional actions done occasionally. This is how systems win over willpower. Willpower fades. Repetition programs. He also makes a dark but important point. Repetition works whether you are conscious of it or not. If you repeatedly avoid discomfort, you train yourself to be weak under pressure. If you repeatedly delay decisions, you train yourself to drift. If you repeatedly lie to yourself, you train yourself to believe lies. Reality does not judge the behavior. It reinforces it. This is why the author insists on writing principles down and turning them into rules. A principle used once is an idea. A principle repeated becomes identity. When you apply the same rule again and again, especially when it's uncomfortable, you stop debating with yourself. Execution becomes automatic. That's when real change happens. He is very direct about learning as well. You do not learn from experience. You learn from repeated reflection on experience. One failure teaches almost nothing. The same failure, examined, corrected, and tested again, teaches everything. Progress comes from cycling through failure, reflection, adjustment, repetition. Skip repetition and nothing compounds. The author also warns that repetition is slow, boring, and invisible at first. This is why most people quit. They don't see results early, so they assume the system doesn't work. But reality compounds quietly. By the time results are obvious, the system has already been running for a long time. In simple terms, what the author is saying is this: what you repeat becomes who you are. What you tolerate repeatedly becomes your standard. What you practice under pressure becomes your default. What you do daily matters more than what you understand intellectually. And the most uncomfortable truth he leaves you with is this: if your life hasn't changed, it's because your repetitions haven't changed. Not your goals, not your intentions, your repetitions. The book makes something brutally clear that most people misunderstand. Repetition is not optional. It is not a motivational trick. It is not about hype. It is how reality decides who stays weak and who becomes inevitable. The author repeats ideas on purpose because the mind does not change through understanding. It changes through repetition under pressure. You can hear the truth once and feel inspired. You can hear it twice and agree with it. But nothing changes until the truth is repeated so many times that it overrides emotion. That is why the book keeps coming back to the same themes: principles, systems, feedback, reality, discipline. Not because the author lacks ideas, but because humans revert to default behavior the moment pressure appears. Repetition is how you fight that regression. The author is clear. Your first reaction is not your best self. Your first reaction is habit. Your first reaction is conditioning. Your first reaction is weakness rehearsed over years. Principles only work if they are repeated until they become automatic, until you don't have to think, until the decision is already made before emotion even gets a vote. This is why motivation fails. Motivation is felt once. Principles are repeated forever. The book explains that repetition is how systems are built. You don't rise because you had one good day. You rise because you execute the same correct behavior long after it stops feeling powerful, long after no one is watching, long after the excitement dies. Repetition is uncomfortable because it removes novelty, and novelty is what the ego feeds on. Repetition feels boring, mechanical, cold, but boredom is where discipline lives, and discipline is what survives chaos. The author makes a dark but honest point. People don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they stop doing what works after the first wave of pain, doubt, or boredom. Repetition is the act of doing the right thing again when nothing feels rewarding anymore. That's why the same ideas appear again and again in the book. Because under stress, humans forget. Under pressure, humans rationalize. Under fear, humans betray their own plans. Repetition is how you protect yourself from yourself. The author wants principles to become non-negotiable reflexes, not thoughts, not opinions, reflexes. You don't debate whether to tell the truth, you do it. You don't debate whether to review mistakes, you do it. You don't debate whether to follow the system, you do it. And this only happens through repetition. The book is warning you, if you don't repeat your principles daily, life will repeat your mistakes for you. Louder each time, more expensive each time, more humiliating each time. Repetition is how pain is converted into progress instead of trauma. Repetition is how chaos turns into order. Repetition is how identity is rewritten. You are not what you believe. You are not what you intend. You are what you repeat when no one is forcing you. And this is the darkest truth the book delivers without mercy. Your life is already a repetition loop. The only question is whether you designed it or drifted into it. The author makes something brutally clear. Your life is not shaped by big moments, but by repeated behavior. What you do once means almost nothing. What you do again and again becomes identity. Repetition is not just practice, it is programming. Every repeated action trains your mind, your emotions, and your future reactions. Over time, you stop choosing. You start defaulting. This is why the book insists that consistency is more powerful than intensity. One burst of motivation changes nothing. 1,000 small repetitions change everything. People fail not because they lack ambition, but because their daily actions contradict their long-term goals. You do not rise to your dreams. You sink to your habits. Repetition decides which direction you fall. The author explains that the brain is a pattern recognition machine. Whatever you repeat, your brain accepts as truth. If you repeatedly avoid discomfort, your brain learns avoidance. If you repeatedly delay decisions, your brain learns hesitation. If you repeatedly choose discipline even when it hurts, your brain learns control. Over time, these patterns feel automatic. That is why change feels impossible, because repetition has already done its work. There is a dark warning hidden here. Repetition works whether you are aware of it or not. You're always training yourself into something. Even doing nothing is repetition. Even procrastination is practice. Even excuses, when repeated, become believable. This is how people wake up one day confused about how they ended up where they are, because the damage was done quietly, one repeated choice at a time. The book also makes clear that repetition is how principles are built. A principle is not a belief you agree with. It is a rule you obey repeatedly under pressure. Until it survives repetition, it is not real. Until you follow it when you are tired, emotional, stressed, or afraid, it does not exist. Principles only become powerful when they are repeated more than your old habits. Repetition is also why change feels painful at first. You are fighting old neural patterns that have been reinforced for years. Your brain resists because repetition has made the old behavior feel safe, even if it is destroying you. The discomfort you feel during change is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It is a sign you're breaking a pattern. The author emphasizes that time magnifies repetition. Small actions repeated over long periods create massive outcomes, good or bad. Discipline compounds, laziness compounds, honesty compounds, self-deception compounds. Nothing stays neutral. What feels insignificant today becomes unstoppable tomorrow. This is why the book rejects motivation and focuses on systems. Motivation is unreliable. Repetition inside a system is unstoppable. When actions are built into structure, repetition happens even when emotions collapse. Systems force repetition, and repetition rewires destiny. There is a cold truth the author wants you to face. Your future is already being rehearsed. Every day you practice the life you're going to live. The way you handle pressure today is training for bigger pressure tomorrow. The way you treat small responsibilities is preparing you for larger ones, or disqualifying you from them. The book does not romanticize this. It does not promise quick transformation. It tells you the truth. Repetition is boring, unglamorous, and lonely, but it is also undefeated. Nothing resists it forever. Not fear, not doubt, not weakness, not even who you used to be. And this is where the message becomes sharp and unavoidable. If you repeat weakness, weakness becomes you. If you repeat discipline, discipline becomes you. If you repeat truth, truth becomes your instinct. You are not one decision away from a different life. You are one repeated decision away. What the author makes painfully clear is this: repetition is not optional. Repetition is not boring busy work. Repetition is the mechanism through which reality rewires you. You do not rise because you understand something once. You rise because you repeat the correct behavior so many times that it becomes automatic, especially when you are tired, emotional, or afraid. Insight without repetition dies quickly. Only repeated action survives pressure. The book explains that the brain does not change through intention or inspiration. It changes through exposure and reinforcement. You can read the truth once and feel powerful for a moment, but that feeling will disappear the first time life pushes back. A repetition is what hardens insight into instinct. Without repetition, every lesson fades. With repetition, even weak discipline becomes unbreakable. The author is ruthless on this point. You do not become what you decide. You become what you repeatedly do. Your principles are meaningless if they only exist on good days. Reality tests you on bad days. That is why repetition must be built into systems, not moods. When the decision is repeated often enough, emotion no longer gets a vote. There is a dark warning embedded here. Repetition works whether you choose it or not. If you repeatedly avoid discomfort, you train fear. If you repeatedly delay decisions, you train hesitation. If you repeatedly lie to yourself, you train blindness. Life does not care whether repetition is intentional. It compounds all behavior equally. The author makes it clear that character is nothing more than repeated behavior under pressure. One good decision does not define you. One disciplined week does not change you. Identity is formed through repetition over time. This is why people who know what to do still fail. They do not repeat it long enough for it to become who they are. Repetition is also why small mistakes are so dangerous. A single bad decision is survivable. A repeated bad decision becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a system. And once a system is in place, it becomes your life. This is why the book insists on catching errors early, before repetition locks them in permanently. The author also explains that repetition removes the need for motivation. The first few times feel heavy. The first weeks feel forced. But repetition turns effort into default. What once required willpower eventually requires nothing. This is how elite performers operate, not by feeling strong, but by removing choice through repetition. There is a brutal clarity here. Whatever you repeat today is voting for the person you will be tomorrow. You are casting votes silently every day with your actions. No speeches, no promises, just repetition. And the final result is non-negotiable. The book does not romanticize this process. Repetition is dull, it is lonely, it is invisible. No one applauds consistency. No one celebrates discipline while it is happening. The reward only arrives after repetition has already reshaped you, and by then you no longer need validation. The darkest truth the author delivers is this: most people don't fail because they are weak. They fail because they stop repeating the right actions before the transformation is complete. They quit during the quiet phase, the phase where nothing seems to be changing, the phase where repetition feels pointless. But that phase is where everything is being built. Repetition is how principles become reflexes. Repetition is how fear loses power. Repetition is how discipline replaces emotion. And once repetition locks in, something terrifying and beautiful happens. You become predictable to yourself. You no longer wonder if you'll act. You no longer debate if you'll quit. You already know what you'll do. That is control. That is power. That is what the author is really teaching. The author makes one thing unmistakably clear: repetition is everything. Insight without repetition is entertainment. Understanding without repetition is self-deception. You don't become disciplined by knowing what discipline is. You become disciplined by repeating disciplined actions until they become automatic. Reality does not respond to awareness. It responds to behavior repeated over time. This is why the book keeps returning to the same ideas again and again. Not because the ideas are complex, but because humans forget. We understand once, then drift. We feel motivated once, then relax. Repetition is the only force strong enough to overwrite old habits. Principles must be rehearsed until they operate without emotion, without hesitation, without debate. The author explains that the brain is a machine trained by patterns. Whatever you repeat, you reinforce. Whatever you tolerate, you teach yourself to accept. If you repeatedly avoid hard decisions, avoidance becomes your identity. If you repeatedly face discomfort, strength becomes your default. There is no neutral repetition. Every repeated action is either building you or breaking you. This is why the book insists on writing principles down and revisiting them constantly. A principle read once is forgotten. A principle repeated daily becomes a rule. A rule followed long enough becomes character. And character decides outcomes when circumstances get brutal. Repetition is how principles move from words into your nervous system. The author is ruthless on this point. You do not rise in moments of pressure. You fall to the level of your training. When fear hits, when stress spikes, when emotions explode, you will not think clearly. You will act automatically. And whatever you have repeated the most will take control. This is why repetition is not optional. It is survival. Motivation fades, memory fades, pain fades. But repetition stays. Repetition builds structure when feelings collapse. It keeps you moving when doubt screams the loudest. It turns chaos into routine and uncertainty into execution. Without repetition, even the best principles rot. The book also makes clear that repetition is uncomfortable by design. Repeating the right actions feels boring, mechanical, unrewarding. That's why most people quit. They mistake boredom for failure. But boredom is the price of mastery. The people who win are not the most inspired, they are the most consistent. There is a dark truth underneath this. Your future is being decided by what you repeat when no one is watching. Not the big moments, not the dramatic decisions, the quiet ones, the small habits, the standards you enforce when you're tired. Repetition is invisible in the moment, but merciless in its results. The author repeats the same warning in different forms throughout the book. If you don't consciously repeat the right behaviors, life will unconsciously repeat the wrong ones for you. The same mistakes, the same regrets, the same disappointments, just in different packaging. This is why principles must be reviewed, tested, applied, and repeated relentlessly, not for inspiration, for control. Because when repetition is aligned with truth, discipline becomes automatic. And when discipline becomes automatic, progress becomes inevitable. So the message is simple but brutal. You don't change by understanding. You change by repeating. You don't build power through motivation. You build it through routine. And the person you become is nothing more than what you repeat under pressure. The author repeats one idea relentlessly because it is the one most people refuse to accept. What you repeat becomes who you are, not what you intend, not what you think about, not what you promise yourself late at night. What you repeat. Your habits are not small. Your routines are not neutral. Every repeated action is a vote for the person you are becoming, whether you are aware of it or not. Over and over, the book drives home the same warning. If you don't choose your principles, you will live by accidental ones. Accidental principles are built from fear, convenience, and past pain. They sound like avoid risk, stay comfortable, don't stand out, don't fail publicly. These principles feel safe, but they quietly cap your life. Designed principles feel uncomfortable, but they expand what is possible. The author keeps returning to this truth. Clarity comes from writing things down. Vague thinking creates weak decisions. Weak decisions create unstable lives. When principles are written, they become visible. When they are visible, they can be tested. When they are tested, they can be improved. What stays in your head stays emotional. What goes on paper becomes structural. Again and again, the book repeats that emotions are terrible leaders. They change daily. They exaggerate fear. They lie about effort. They convince you that rest is deserved when it's actually avoidance. Principles exist because emotions cannot be trusted under pressure. When stress rises, emotion wants relief. Principles demand progress. The author is almost ruthless about this point. Pain is the price of progress, and avoiding pain guarantees stagnation. There is no version of growth that is painless. There is only chosen pain and unchosen pain. Chosen pain is discipline, honesty, and effort. Unchosen pain is regret, anxiety, and missed potential. The book makes it clear you will pay either way. One of the most repeated messages is about learning speed. The fastest learners win, not the smartest ones. Learning requires admitting you are wrong. That admission wounds ego. Ego resists learning. This is why most people stay average, not because they can't learn, but because they won't feel small long enough to grow. The author repeats that mistakes are not the enemy. Unexamined mistakes are. Failing once is information. Failing the same way repeatedly is negligence. Principles turn failure into feedback instead of identity. You are not your mistake, but if you refuse to learn from it, you will relive it. The author repeats one idea relentlessly because it is the one most people refuse to accept. What you repeat becomes who you are, not what you intend, not what you think about, not what you promise yourself late at night. What you repeat. Your habits are not small. Your routines are not neutral. Every repeated action is a vote for the person you are becoming, whether you are aware of it or not. Over and over, the book drives home the same warning. If you don't choose your principles, you will live by accidental ones. Accidental principles are built from fear, convenience, and past pain. They sound like avoid risk, stay comfortable, don't stand out, don't fail publicly. These principles feel safe, but they quietly cap your life. Designed principles feel uncomfortable, but they expand what is possible. The author keeps returning to this truth. Clarity comes from writing things down. Vague thinking creates weak decisions. Weak decisions create unstable lives. When principles are written, they become visible. When they are visible, they can be tested. When they are tested, they can be improved. What stays in your head stays emotional. What goes on paper becomes structural. Again and again, the book repeats that emotions are terrible leaders. They change daily. They exaggerate fear. They lie about effort. They convince you that rest is deserved when it's actually avoidance. Principles exist because emotions cannot be trusted under pressure. When stress rises, emotion wants relief. Principles demand progress. The author is almost ruthless about this point. Pain is the price of progress, and avoiding pain guarantees stagnation. There is no version of growth that is painless. There is only chosen pain and unchosen pain. Chosen pain is discipline, honesty, and effort. Unchosen pain is regret, anxiety, and missed potential. The book makes it clear you will pay either way. One of the most repeated messages is about learning speed. The fastest learners win, not the smartest ones. Learning requires admitting you are wrong. That admission wounds ego. Ego resists learning. This is why most people stay average, not because they can't learn, but because they won't feel small long enough to grow. The author repeats that mistakes are not the enemy. Unexamined mistakes are. Failing once is information. Failing the same way repeatedly is negligence. Principles turn failure into feedback instead of identity. You are not your mistake, but if you refuse to learn from it, you will relive it. Another line the book circles back to is this: systems beat goals. Goals give direction, but systems create results. Motivation fades, systems remain. When life becomes chaotic, the system you built will either carry you or expose you. There is no neutral outcome. The repetition continues around responsibility, not blame. Responsibility. The moment you fully accept that your decisions shape your outcomes, power returns to you. Blame feels comforting, but it removes control. Responsibility feels heavy, but it gives freedom. The author makes it unmistakably clear which one leads to a meaningful life. The book keeps pressing this final idea into the listener's mind. You will be tested when it matters most, not on your best day, on your worst. When you're tired, when you're emotional, when quitting feels justified, that is when principles decide your future. Not motivation, not hope, principles. And the repetition is intentional, because transformation does not happen from hearing something once. It happens when the message becomes impossible to ignore, when it echoes, when it follows you into your decisions, when it interrupts your old patterns. The author does not end with excitement. He ends with certainty. Life will pressure you. Emotion will betray you. Comfort will tempt you. Principles are what remain when everything else collapses. Repeat the right actions. Repeat the right thinking. Repeat the right standards. Because in the end, your life is repetition made visible. One truth the author returns to again and again is this: nothing powerful happens once. Change does not come from a single decision, a single insight, or a single moment of motivation. It comes from repetition, from doing the right thing again after it stopped feeling exciting, again after it stopped feeling meaningful, again after no one noticed. Reality rewards what you repeat, not what you intend. The book makes it painfully clear that success is boring on the surface. It is the same principles applied over and over, long after the emotional rush disappears. Most people quit not because something is impossible, but because it feels repetitive. They confuse boredom with failure, but repetition is not stagnation. It is refinement. Each repetition sharpens judgment, strengthens discipline, and reduces error. The author emphasizes that compounding only works for those who stay consistent when progress is invisible. Early effort often produces nothing but doubt. Late effort produces everything. This is where most people break. They abandon the system right before it starts working. Principles are designed to carry you through this phase when belief is weak and evidence hasn't arrived yet. Another repeated warning is this: your habits are voting every day for the person you are becoming. One vote doesn't decide the election. Thousands do. Skipping discipline once won't destroy you, but repeating that skip will. Likewise, doing the hard thing once won't save you, but repeating it will. Life is not decided by dramatic moments, but by quiet patterns repeated daily. The author also makes it clear that you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your standards. Goals are temporary, standards are permanent. Motivation fades, standards remain. Principles are standards written in advance, so you don't negotiate with yourself in moments of weakness. They remove choice when choice would betray you. Over and over, the message returns to this. Thinking doesn't change your life. Behavior does. Insight without action is entertainment. Understanding without repetition is useless. You can know every principle in the book and still fail if you don't apply them daily. Knowledge does not compound. Execution does. The book insists that reality is patient but unforgiving. It allows you to repeat bad decisions quietly for years. It lets you drift. It lets you delay. But eventually, the bill arrives. And when it does, it doesn't care what you meant to do, only what you repeatedly did. One of the darkest but most empowering ideas is that discipline eventually becomes identity. At first it feels forced, then it feels normal, eventually it feels inevitable. You stop asking whether you'll do the work. You just do it. That is when progress accelerates. That is when life starts responding differently to you. The author is relentless about this point. You must build principles that work even when you don't. When you're tired, when you're emotional, when you're discouraged, principles don't wait for alignment. They execute regardless. That is why they outperform motivation every time. And here is the quiet repetition the book never lets you escape. Fail, reflect, adjust, repeat. Fail better, think clear, act faster, repeat again. This loop is not optional, it is life. In the end, motivation is a spark. Repetition is the fire. Principles are the structure that keeps it burning when everything else goes dark. So keep going. Not because it feels good, not because it's exciting, but because who you become is decided by what you repeat when no one is watching. One truth the author returns to again and again is this: nothing powerful happens once. Change does not come from a single decision, a single insight, or a single moment of motivation. It comes from repetition, from doing the right thing again after it stopped feeling exciting, again after it stopped feeling meaningful, again after no one noticed. Reality rewards what you repeat, not what you intend. The book makes it painfully clear that success is boring on the surface. It is the same principles applied over and over, long after the emotional rush disappears. Most people quit not because something is impossible, but because it feels repetitive. They confuse boredom with failure, but repetition is not stagnation. It is refinement. Each repetition sharpens judgment, strengthens discipline, and reduces error. The author emphasizes that compounding only works for those who stay consistent when progress is invisible. Early effort often produces nothing but doubt. Late effort produces everything. This is where most people break. They abandon the system right before it starts working. Principles are designed to carry you through this phase when belief is weak and evidence hasn't arrived yet. Another repeated warning is this: your habits are voting every day for the person you are becoming. One vote doesn't decide the election. Thousands do. Skipping discipline once won't destroy you, but repeating that skip will. Likewise, doing the hard thing once won't save you, but repeating it will. Life is not decided by dramatic moments, but by quiet patterns repeated daily. The author also makes it clear that you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your standards. Goals are temporary, standards are permanent. Motivation fades, standards remain. Principles are standards written in advance, so you don't negotiate with yourself in moments of weakness. They remove choice when choice would betray you. Over and over, the message returns to this: thinking doesn't change your life, behavior does. Insight without action is entertainment. Understanding without repetition is useless. You can know every principle in the book and still fail if you don't apply them daily. Knowledge does not compound. Execution does. The book insists that reality is patient but unforgiving. It allows you to repeat bad decisions quietly for years. It lets you drift. It lets you delay. But eventually, the bill arrives. And when it does, it doesn't care what you meant to do, only what you repeatedly did. One of the darkest but most empowering ideas is that discipline eventually becomes identity. At first it feels forced, then it feels normal, eventually it feels inevitable. You stop asking whether you'll do the work. You just do it. That is when progress accelerates. That is when life starts responding differently to you. The author is relentless about this point. You must build principles that work even when you don't. When you're tired, when you're emotional, when you're discouraged, principles don't wait for alignment. They execute regardless. That is why they outperform motivation every time. And here is the quiet repetition the book never lets you escape. Fail, reflect, adjust, repeat. Fail better, think clear, act faster, repeat again. This loop is not optional. It is life. In the end, motivation is a spark. Repetition is the fire. Principles are the structure that keeps it burning when everything else goes dark. So keep going. Not because it feels good, not because it's exciting, but because who you become is decided by what you repeat when no one is watching. The author keeps returning to the same truth from different angles because repetition is not accidental. It is deliberate. The lesson is simple but unforgiving. You will repeat who you are unless you interrupt it on purpose. Life does not drift upward. It decays by default. And if you do not build principles strong enough to fight that decay, you will slowly become a weaker version of yourself without even noticing. Again and again, the message comes back to this. Your biggest enemy is not the world. It is your unconscious behavior. The author repeats that most people are not defeated by one massive failure, but by thousands of tiny decisions made without awareness. Decisions driven by emotion, by fear, by comfort, by ego. Principles exist to stop you from being controlled by impulses you didn't even choose. One of the strongest repeated ideas is that clarity beats hope. Hope feels good, but it does nothing under pressure. When life tightens, when uncertainty hits, when fear floods your mind, hope disappears. Principles stay. The author repeats that you must decide in advance how you will act, because in the moment, emotions will lie to you. If you wait to decide later, later never comes. Another idea the author drills relentlessly is this: pain is unavoidable, but useless pain is optional. Pain that teaches you is valuable. Pain that repeats is wasted. If you are suffering in the same way year after year, it is not bad luck. It is a failure to learn. The author repeats this because most people feel pain but refuse reflection. They feel the burn but never change the system that caused it. Over and over, the book reminds you that ego is the silent killer of progress. Ego wants comfort. Ego wants to look good. Ego wants to protect identity instead of results. The author repeats that every time ego wins, learning loses. And when learning stops, growth dies quietly. Not dramatically, quietly. That is why ego is so dangerous. It doesn't scream, it whispers. Another repeated message is brutal. Time does not save you. Time exposes you. If your principles are weak, time will not heal them. It will magnify them. Bad habits compound just like good ones. Weak decisions compound just like disciplined ones. The author repeats this because people lie to themselves by saying, "One day I'll fix it." One day is a myth. Systems are real. The book keeps circling back to responsibility almost obsessively, not responsibility as guilt, but as power. The author repeats that the moment you fully accept responsibility, excuses lose their grip. You stop waiting. You stop blaming. You stop negotiating with reality. Responsibility is heavy, but it is the only weight that strengthens you instead of crushing you. Another principle the author reinforces again and again is this: you cannot think your way out of a life you behaved your way into. Insight without execution changes nothing. Awareness without structure fades. This is why principles must be written, enforced, and followed when emotions are loud. The author repeats this because people love understanding but avoid action. The book also repeats a cold truth about motivation. Motivation is unreliable. It shows up when things are easy and disappears when they matter most. Principles are designed for the worst days, not the best ones. When you are tired, when you are doubting, when quitting feels reasonable. That is when principles prove their worth. Again and again, the author reminds you that progress is not dramatic. It is boring, repetitive, mechanical. Most of the work happens in silence, without applause, without feedback. People quit because it doesn't feel like progress. The author repeats this to separate those who want results from those who want excitement. And beneath all of it, the deepest repeated message is this: you are becoming someone whether you like it or not. Every day you are reinforcing an identity, either the person who avoids, delays, and negotiates, or the person who executes, reflects, and adapts. There is no pause button. There is no neutral setting. The author repeats these ideas because they are not meant to be understood once. They are meant to be remembered when you are weak, when you are tired, when the old patterns try to pull you back. This book does not beg you to change. It dares you to stop lying to yourself. Because once you see the pattern, repeating it becomes a choice. And once it's a choice, you are responsible. That is the weight of this book. That is its power. The author is brutally clear about one thing most people refuse to accept. Repetition is destiny. What you repeatedly do is not a habit. It is a vote for the person you are becoming. One good decision means nothing if it is not repeated. One burst of motivation means nothing if it fades. Life does not change from intensity. It changes from consistency, applied over time. The book explains that success is not built in moments of inspiration, but in boring, almost invisible repetition. Waking up and executing when nothing feels exciting. Following principles when no reward is immediate. Doing the same disciplined actions long after the emotional payoff disappears. This is where most people quit, not because the work is too hard, but because it stops feeling special. The author repeats again and again that reality rewards patterns, not intentions. If your daily actions do not align with your long-term goals, your goals are irrelevant. You don't rise to what you want. You fall to what you repeat. Over time, repetition turns behavior into identity, and identity is incredibly difficult to escape. There is a dark truth here. Every time you break a promise to yourself, you are training yourself not to trust yourself. And every time you keep a promise, especially when it hurts, you rebuild that trust. The book makes it clear that self-trust is not emotional. It is earned through repetition. Discipline is not a personality trait. It is the result of doing the right thing again and again and again until it becomes automatic. The author also warns that repetition works both ways. Repeating avoidance makes fear stronger. Repeating excuses makes weakness feel normal. Repeating comfort makes discomfort intolerable. You're always training something, either strength or fragility. There is no pause button. The system is always running. One of the hardest lines embedded in the philosophy of the book is this: you will not suddenly change one day. There is no moment where discipline magically appears. There is only today's decision, repeated tomorrow, and then repeated again when you are tired, frustrated, and doubtful. That is how principles become real, not when you agree with them, but when you obey them. The author emphasizes that principles are meant to remove choice from moments where choice usually fails. You do not wake up every day and debate whether to be disciplined. You follow the rule. You execute the system. You let repetition do the work that motivation cannot. And this is where the message becomes almost uncomfortable. Most people don't fail because they choose wrong once. They fail because they choose wrong consistently. Small compromises repeated daily will destroy more lives than one big mistake ever could. In the same way, small disciplined actions repeated daily will build outcomes that feel impossible to others. The book reminds you that repetition is slow, thankless, and lonely, but it is also unstoppable. Compounding does not need permission. It does not need applause. It only needs time and consistency. And once it takes hold, it becomes frighteningly powerful. In its most motivational truth, the book makes this clear. You don't need to feel ready. You don't need to feel confident. You don't need to feel inspired. You need to repeat the right actions even when you feel nothing. That is how weak people become strong. That is how chaos becomes order. That is how an ordinary life becomes unrecognizable. Repetition is not boring. Repetition is domination over yourself. And once you understand that, you stop chasing motivation and start building inevitability. The author makes one thing painfully repetitive on purpose. Success is not an event, it is a pattern. Nothing changes once. Nothing is fixed once. Nothing is decided once. The same choices appear again and again, dressed differently at different moments of weakness. And every time, you either reinforce the person you are becoming or you weaken them. This is why the book repeats itself, because life repeats itself. The author clearly says that most failure is not dramatic. It is quiet repetition of small, bad decisions. The same excuses, the same emotional reactions, the same avoidance, over and over. People don't ruin their lives in one decision. They ruin them by repeating the wrong ones daily and calling it normal. Principles exist to interrupt repetition before it hardens into destiny. Again and again, the book reminds you what you practice becomes permanent. If you practice avoidance, you become avoidant. If you practice discipline, you become disciplined. If you practice honesty, you become hard to deceive, even by yourself. Life rewards what you repeat, not what you intend. The author repeats this idea relentlessly. Pain that is not reflected upon will repeat itself. The same mistake will return in a new form, a new job, a new relationship, a new opportunity, same pattern, same outcome. Until you stop and extract the lesson, reality will keep sending the same test, harder each time. Another repeated warning is this: you do not rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. When pressure hits, when emotions surge, when fatigue sets in, you will not suddenly become strong. You will default to whatever you have built. This is why principles must be designed before chaos arrives. In the moment, it's too late. The author keeps saying without mercy that emotion is a terrible decision maker. Feelings change hourly. Reality doesn't care. If your decisions depend on how you feel, your life will feel unstable forever. Principles remove feelings from the equation. They act when you hesitate. They decide when you're tired. They move when you want to stop. Another idea repeated with almost uncomfortable intensity is this: ego blocks learning. Every time you defend yourself instead of listening, you delay progress. Every time you explain instead of examine, you stay the same. Growth requires humiliation before it brings elevation. The book repeats this because people resist it the most. The author also repeats that clarity comes from writing things down. Thoughts in your head lie to you. Written principles expose you. When your rules are visible, excuses lose power. This is why high performers document decisions, failures, and lessons. Memory fades. Writing doesn't. Over and over, the book reminds you that time is not neutral. Time either compounds discipline or compounds regret. Doing nothing is still a choice, with consequences. Waiting is still movement in the wrong direction. If you're not actively improving the system is actively degrading. One of the darkest repeated truths is this: no one feels sorry for wasted potential, not even you, forever. At first, you protect it with excuses. Later, you mourn it quietly. The book repeats this not to shame you, but to wake you up before regret becomes permanent. The author repeats a final core message until it becomes impossible to ignore. Take responsibility or lose control. There is no middle ground. Blame feels lighter, but it costs more. Responsibility feels heavier, but it gives power. And this is why the book sounds repetitive, because life is repetitive. And the lesson you don't learn calmly will be taught again, violently. So the message continues, steady and unromantic. Build principles, repeat discipline, repeat honesty, repeat reflection, repeat execution. Because what you repeat becomes who you are. And whether you like it or not, that repetition is already happening. The author keeps repeating one idea in different forms, because repetition is the lesson itself. Change does not happen from hearing the truth once. It happens when the truth is repeated until it breaks resistance, until it rewires behavior, until it becomes automatic. This is why the book circles back again and again to the same concepts: reality, responsibility, systems, discipline. Not because there is nothing new to say, but because most people don't listen the first time, or the second, or the 10th. What the author is clearly saying is this: your life is shaped by what you repeatedly do, not what you occasionally understand. Insight without repetition fades. Motivation without structure dies. Principles only become real when they are enforced daily, especially when you don't feel like it. Repetition is not boring, it is conditioning, and conditioning is how identity is formed. The book makes it painfully obvious that people don't fail from lack of knowledge. They fail from lack of consistent execution. You already know what you should do. You already know what you should stop doing. The problem is that knowing once does nothing. Only repeated action under pressure changes outcomes. This is why the author insists on systems, because systems repeat for you when your mind is tired. Over and over the message returns. Small decisions, repeated daily, become destiny. Not dramatic moments, not rare bursts of effort, quiet repetition, wake up the same way, think the same way, decide the same way. Either you repeat discipline or you repeat regret. There is no third option. The darkness in the book comes from this realization. Every day you repeat the same weak pattern, you are voting for a future you secretly fear. And every day you repeat a hard discipline, you are slowly building a life strong enough to hold pressure. Repetition is never neutral. It is either building you or dismantling you. The author is ruthless about this point. You do not rise when things go well. You fall to the level of your systems. And systems are nothing more than repeated behaviors locked into structure. When chaos hits, you won't suddenly become disciplined. You will become what you have practiced. That is why repetition matters more than intensity. Motivation comes and goes. The book repeats this because people refuse to accept it. You will not feel strong every day. You will not feel confident every day. You will not feel clear every day. If your progress depends on feelings, you are already finished. Repetition removes the need for emotion. You act because the rule exists, not because the feeling does. The author keeps returning to pain because pain is the fastest teacher, but only if it is processed repeatedly and correctly. One lesson ignored becomes suffering. One lesson repeated becomes wisdom. People who stay stuck are not unlucky. They are untrained. They never repeated the reflection step long enough for change to stick. There is a hard truth buried deep in the book. Your future is boringly predictable if your habits stay the same. Nothing magical is coming. No sudden breakthrough will save you from years of repetition. The only miracle available is disciplined consistency over time, and most people reject it because it doesn't feel exciting. The repetition of responsibility is intentional. The author wants it to feel heavy, because responsibility is heavy, but it is also freeing. The moment you accept that everything meaningful in your life responds to repeated decisions, you stop feeling like a victim, you stop waiting, you stop hoping, you start building. The book keeps hammering this idea because it is the dividing line between those who change and those who don't. The willingness to do the boring, uncomfortable, repetitive work without immediate reward. This is where almost everyone quits. This is where principles separate talkers from builders. And here is the darkest repetition of all. If you don't choose your repetition, life will choose it for you. If you don't repeat discipline, you will repeat struggle. If you don't repeat truth, you will repeat mistakes, day after day, year after year, until one day repetition becomes identity, and identity becomes destiny. That is what the author is really saying. The author makes one thing painfully clear: repetition is destiny, not talent, not luck, not intelligence. What you repeat becomes who you are. What you repeat becomes what you earn. What you repeat becomes how your life feels when no one is watching. There's nothing dramatic about this truth, and that is what makes it terrifying. Lives are not destroyed in one bad decision. They are destroyed in thousands of small ones repeated without awareness. The book explains that the brain is a machine that strengthens whatever it uses most. Every repeated thought carves a deeper groove. Every repeated reaction becomes faster, more automatic, more permanent. If you repeat avoidance, you become an avoider. If you repeat discipline, you become disciplined. If you repeat emotional decisions, you lose the ability to think clearly under pressure. Repetition does not ask whether something is good or bad. It only asks whether it is frequent. This is why the author insists on principles. Principles interrupt repetition. They force you to pause before reacting. They slow down the automatic behaviors that quietly control your life. Without principles, you are not choosing. You are replaying. The same fears, the same habits, the same outcomes over and over again. The author is ruthless about this point. Your future is nothing more than your current behavior, repeated long enough. People hope for change while repeating the same actions every day. That hope is meaningless. Change does not come from desire. It comes from replacing old repetitions with new ones, deliberately, painfully, consistently. There is a dark warning embedded here. Repetition works even when you are unconscious of it. Skipping one hard task today trains your brain to skip the next one faster. Ignoring one uncomfortable truth makes the next lie easier. Choosing comfort once lowers your resistance to choosing it again. Over time, resistance disappears completely, and by then, escape feels impossible. The book makes it clear that discipline is simply intelligent repetition. It is not intensity. It is not motivation. It is doing the same correct actions when they are boring, unrewarded, and unnoticed. Most people fail not because they cannot do hard things once, but because they cannot repeat them when nothing exciting happens. The author repeatedly emphasizes that emotions are temporary, but repetitions are permanent. Acting emotionally once is human. Acting emotionally every day builds a life you cannot control. Principles exist so that repetition favors logic instead of impulse. They turn good decisions into habits and habits into identity. There is an especially heavy idea here. Identity is just repetition with a name. You are not undisciplined. You have repeated undisciplined actions. You are not unlucky. You have repeated poor decisions. Change the repetition, and identity changes automatically, but only after time, and only without excuses. The book strips away one final illusion, that repetition becomes easier with time. It doesn't. It becomes quieter. The struggle fades, but the demand remains. You don't feel heroic for doing what must be done. You just do it. And that is how real power is built, without emotion, without drama, without applause. The author is clear. The most dangerous day is the day you stop repeating the right behaviors because they feel normal. Normality kills urgency. Comfort kills vigilance. Principles must be enforced even when success appears stable, because decay begins the moment repetition weakens. The final repetition the book demands is this: reflect, adjust, repeat, again and again and again, until the correct response becomes automatic, until discipline replaces doubt, until action replaces thought. Because life does not change when you understand this book. It changes when you repeat what it demands. Every day, without exception, without negotiation. That is the author's message, cold, clear, unforgiving. And if you stop repeating it, life will repeat its lesson.